Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Jonny McMurtry. Jonny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Big fan of the show, so glad to be on.
Really pleased to have you on today, and excited to be talking with you and the research you've been doing. Why don't we get started by getting you to introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Cool. My name's Jonny McMurtry, based in Brisbane, Australia. Currently completing a research project looking at the personal strivings or motivations for elite age grade rugby union players. Been involved in Rugby Australia's elite age grade programs for about 12 years now. Been a rugby coach in Australia, as I said, for about 12, 13 years as well. And it was actually incidents more closer to home. I have a 18-year-old son now who dropped out of rugby twice, which led me to look at, it created the itch that I wanted to scratch, look around why players drop out of sport, or, probably the more important question, why players stay motivated and stay within sports. So after doing some grad dip in sports coaching with Hugh Q, my now advisors, Cliff Mallet and Stephen Wren, encouraged me to go down this avenue. Ask the questions, approach Rugby Australia to try and get their super rugby franchises involved to just try and understand why these players within the elite pathway, what are they actually trying to achieve? What do they want to get out of rugby? And even just trying to paint a better picture of what they are motivated by or trying to achieve away from rugby as well. Just to offer us a more rounded picture or a better snapshot of the players who are involved in their sport at this time. So that's been the last 2, 3, 4 years. It's been slightly delayed. This research project's been slightly interrupted by the COVID pandemic that has been. So, but again, from that, it's the novel questioning or data gathering style actually helped, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more. So.
Really looking forward to talking with you about personal strivings within the sport of rugby, and obviously all of your findings, I'm sure, translate to other sports. Hey, let's begin at the beginning. That's not much of an Australian accent you've got there, mate.
No, that's it. Yeah, originally born and brought up in Northern Ireland. Went to completed my schooling, as I said, in Northern Ireland. Then went over to UWIC, which is now called Cardiff Met. Which again was actually quite interesting. That was probably a first sort of glimpse into high profile or high performing sport with a number of sports teams and programs that they have over there. But actually I'm out in Australia now. I've been 15, 16 years in Australia, actually working within the mining industry. So based in Brisbane, but I cover a fair bit of ground around Australia. Less so recently, obviously with all the travel restrictions, but. So as I say, the sport research, sport coaching is an area of passion. As I say, I do a lot of writing about it. Currently completing this research, probably going to start some more research next year. But as I said, it was an itch that I just needed to scratch when being involved in age grade coaching. That I needed to look in why or ways to keep athletes, particularly in this case rugby union players, involved in the sport. So yeah, it's a labour of love. We'll call that a labour of love.
Fascinating. So your full-time job has been in the mining industry. You've been a part-time coach and somebody who's been fascinated by the motivational side of sports and the motivational side of youth level sport. It's really interesting, Jonny, that you became fascinated in this area largely because of the experiences of your son. You're saying is that you're 18 now. Your son, who's now 18 years old, dropped out of rugby a couple of times. I mean, that must be quite an emotional thing, to watch. I'm guessing to watch your son, who I could hazard a guess is passionate about rugby, passionate about playing and enjoying his rugby, but dropping out. Do you want to speak to us a little bit about that experience?
Absolutely. He's now, which you'll probably like, more passionate about golf now, but it just really came from, without throwing stones, overzealous coaching.
Right.
There's a real misalignment between why these players were involved, or why they were there. A misunderstanding of why they were actually playing the game, what they wanted to get from it, to what the coach was offering as a learning environment or a playing environment for them. So again, there was just this, he was catering for one side of rugby when my son was probably looking for another side of rugby. And again, it was just interesting to talk to him and maybe some of his friends as well of what they're trying to get from sport, which led me down this avenue of what are these fellas trying to achieve? What does sport look like for them? And again, I think we're painting it with a very broad brush when sometimes it might need some finer strokes, as an example. That it was just. It was, as I said, rugby's been my passion, something I've been involved in, as a player right through school, and got into coaching relatively early, and now doing some research around it. I love the game, probably more than I should, but as I say, it was something for me that I just wanted that deeper or wider pool of players to stay in the game. I wanted more players to remain involved past this transition age, this important transition age when they exit school and go into senior rugby or high performance programs. All of a sudden there's this misalignment or disconnect from the game. So I just wanted to try and find out why, answer some of these questions of why, or just offer a snapshot or a broader picture for coaches involved in the game, both at a social level and at this high performance level. So that initial dropout of my son Jacob, that did start this ball rolling. But as I said, it's being allowed to access to certain avenues of research and even access to the high performance programs been good to actually paint a decent picture for it.
So your son dropped out a couple of times. So there's an element of striving to understand why young players in general, drop out. That also conversely led to an interest in, why do players continue to be engaged? You mentioned this phrase, overzealous coaching. Now, there's thousands of coaches listening in, and I think many might be saying, well, hang on a minute, overzealous coaching. I'm passionate about coaching. I'm passionate about my players improving. What do you mean by overzealous coaching?
For me, it was, for the direct example of this was, they were training, starting their preseason very, very early. We're talking, 4.5 months before, this is a junior season, a 14-year-old season that was meant to kick off.
Yeah.
It was very top heavy, very prescribed, very, it wasn't even game intuitive either, or game relatable. It was a lot of, running and physical exertion when, as you said, like these were 14, 15-year-old players at this stage. It just needed to be, whether it was game-based activities or something similar, something what was more relatable or looked like the game, where they could actually see some progression or ticking off some boxes that made it look like a game for them. But again, the big thing that was missing for me was the attunement to why they were there, or why they wanted to. Kids, especially at that age, they do want to play. There is that inclination in them to pick up a soccer ball, a rugby ball, whatever it might be, and start a game. And us as coaches sometimes get in the way of that. But I guess it was the misalignment between what they wanted to achieve versus what the coach wanted to achieve, or what they were trying to get out of starting this preseason early versus trying to keep it fun and engaging an environment. So it was again it was that sort of, when we say overzealous coaching, it was more so a misalignment to what the players actually wanted or what they were trying to get out of it.
There was a disconnect.
Very much so. Yeah.
And perhaps an early seriousness that perhaps, to use your term, misalignment, was misaligned with the wants, the needs, the motivations of the athletes themselves.
Yes. Yeah, that would, that's pretty much in a nutshell, exactly it, yeah.
And so this got the ball rolling in terms of your interest in researching this area. And I know you started this with 3 questions. Question number 1, what are the most common strivings for all players involved in this elite age grade rugby environment? So you were researching elite age grade rugby players, and we can be more specific in a minute as to what age that is. So what are the common strivings? Question number 2, do involved players' strivings or overall motivational themes change over the course of a competitive season? So do motivations change? And the third one is there alignment between rugby and global strivings? So tell us a little bit more about how this sort of officially started, how you reached out to the organisations, and who specifically, what ages, who was it that you were studying here?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I've been involved in Rugby Australia age gate programs, what they call the Junior Gold Cup. So that it brings in 15, 16, 17-year-old players into a high performance environment. So I've been involved in and had access to coaching some of these players in and around Brisbane. And around that, then was able to obviously speak with certain stakeholders or certain people within Rugby Australia. After speaking to Stephen Wren, Cliff Mallet, I approached some people within Rugby Australia. They liked the idea. The idea was to better understand or create an environment for the Super Rugby players, Super Rugby franchises, under 20 players. So again, I just exited out of school environments and gone into these high performance environments. All of a sudden, there's these motivated agents where they have choice and have, are trying to compile reason for why they should remain involved in their sport. So it was an access to these players. Again, it was for mutual benefit to scratch my itch, as I said before, but also try and create this framework or a bit of a snapshot for these players that are involved at this stage, and give the coach some understanding of how they could coach or what they can offer these players at this critical age.
But surely at that age, they're in it to be professionals, aren't they? I mean, they're some of the best players. Surely it just begins and ends there, no?
Well, again, this is the critical question, the $1 million question, or maybe slightly less so in rugby union. But yeah, this is this is why, again, it's this better understanding of why these players are involved in their sport. Again, I've spoken to club coaches, high performance coaches, and again, the general impression, the general understanding is that if these fellas are involved in these high performance programs, that surely that they want to move on to the next stage. But again, the question is, do we actually know that? Have we as coaches, as administrators, as people involved in the programs, have we asked those critical questions of why these players are involved in their sport, so that we can offer them what they want or need from each stage of their development? It doesn't matter, as I say, if it's high performance or deemed as a talented 14-year-old player or 34-year-old player. Realistically, us as sports coaches or involved in these programs, we've got to try and understand why they are acting or what they're motivated by in a certain way, to try and better understand what they're trying to achieve from their sport. It was a great podcast. I listened to one of yours there the other day. We had Doug Lamov on, and he talked about expertise is knowing where to look. But if we as coaches don't know what these players see or even where they're looking, how can we better facilitate them to reach these expert levels that we're talking about? Or are we just letting the talent system, essentially the cream rise to the top, without actually trying to help facilitate or encourage certain players to act or see things a certain way?
Not least monitoring what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what their emotions are, what they're experiencing, what they want, and how they want to get there, as you mentioned. So in many respects, what I'm hearing you say, Jonny, is that these players, at perhaps the top end of the talent pathway, one might assume that all they're trying to do is get to the very, very top. That may be the case, or it may not be the case. It might be that they might be engaged for other reasons. And even if they are striving to get to the top. It's finding out how they want to get there, what experience they want to have on that journey. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, pretty much. And part of the reason why we looked down the line of personal strivings or characteristic adaptations was, all of a sudden these players, again, these players were. It was an interesting age where most of the players involved all the players, were involved were between the ages of 17 to 20 years of age. So they're at that personality development stage where, they're really at the end. They're starting to act as motivated agents. They've got these demands of social life, and all of a sudden their roles are they're taking in situation time, and their role, they're trying to establish this sense of identity versus role confusion as an example as well. So it was interesting to try and understand what they're typically trying to achieve. So like that's where we looked at strivings both within sport and away from their sport. So again, we can get this sense of commonality or understanding of what these players are trying to achieve within the sport, and even what they're trying to achieve. Again, a lot of these players were going through different phases in their life. Some were going through uni, some were doing apprenticeships, some were in like full-time rugby contracts as an example. But it was just to try and offer a snapshot for the coaches running these programs, just try and find these points of commonality or points of common language, of how to actually relate to the players and get, both their points across, but understand the points or what's important for the players, and make up an environment or a game that kind of will better reflect what they're trying to achieve.
So you were trying to find out what these young elite players, when I say elite players, they were at least 17 plus, I think. Yeah. So I think the term elite is useful here and correct here. What they wanted, how they wanted to go about getting what they wanted. I suppose under the heading of personal striving, what were they striving for, and how were they striving to get what they wanted? How did you measure that?
So we used there's a framework out there. Robert Eamons developed personal strivings framework. So we actually applied that. It's one of the first. It's quite a novel research methodology in that respect. So for a couple of reasons, we don't think it's been used a lot within a sport research, but also we used it fully remote digitally. So all the players we actually had access to. All the players of this age grade right across Australia. So, there were some players based in Perth, Sydney, Brisbane. So because they were able to answer these questions, so we offered them a digital questionnaire, which they filled in from, wherever they're comfortable to answer. So hopefully that allowed for some honest answers, and there was no real impartial or any pressure applied from the likes of Rugby Australia or myself. But again, we asked them what they were typically trying to achieve within sport and away from sport, just to try. They offered 5 sport-specific strivings and between 5 and 10 global strivings, or strivings away from their sport as well. So, and from that, then we were able to code and identify certain themes within that, using Robert Eamons' framework that he's done for just general personal strivings on a psychological level.
So people can get a clear picture of this. What were the specific strivings that it was asking?
It was. We offered some examples of sport specific strivings. We offered what they would consider might be important. But again, we were trying to ask them, the players, it was an open ended question of what they were typically trying to achieve on a daily basis or a weekly basis, whatever it might have been. We were just trying to ask them what they're typically trying to achieve within rugby or typically trying to achieve away from their sport, as an example.
Okay, so it was pretty open-ended.
Yeah, very much.
So, what did you discover?
Well, it was interesting. So we got a lot of the data that we expected to get. So within the sport-specific strivings, the fellas were very much achievement-focused. Approach, high approach themes where they're trying to achieve something. Very much achievement-focused strivings where they were, they had certain goals or measures or internal markers that they were trying to achieve. The interesting part around that was even within the sport-specific strivings, there was no real talk or measure of, winning flags or winning certain competitions or cups or anything like that. It was very much an individualized goal focus. So they're trying to meet personal markers or personal achievements that they had set for themselves, which was, really quite interesting, and again, quite difficult, to present back to coaches, because again, there's very much this layered, individualized focus or player focus within this. So again, very much a long burn if you're trying to create that, the goal settings within that team environment. And then again, there was a very much a personal growth focus. So again, trying to trying to improve themselves, but it was a much more holistic way, trying to improve themselves, trying to achieve certain things, trying to, a bit more reading, a bit more intellectual base, just trying to grow internally and gain some sort of sense of understanding and belief system in the world as well. So yeah, there's I guess some of the interesting, subsets from this, and one of the more interesting subsets for this was there was very little talk of enjoyment or fun within the common language used within these strivings, which initially was a bit of a juxtapose with a lot of the coaches and whatever, because like we sort of talked about there before, surely these fellas are involved, if they're in this high performance sport, that they want to be involved in this competitive nature. But it was interesting then read and sort of fold my research findings in with Amanda Vizek's work back in 2015, when she looked at the framework of what fun looks like for young athletes. She looked up the athletes up to the age of 19, which is very similar to ours. And again, the main areas of her framework, which found athletes coded as having fun, was trying hard. So the idea of setting and achieving certain goals. Positive coaching, that coaching encouragement or knowledgeable coaching, getting that feedback, which there was a number of affiliation goals within rugby as well, where they're trying to use the coach as a resource and sponge a bit of information off them, but then still, have these measures for themselves. And then learning and improving as well. So it was interesting to see. Initially, it was quite surprising to me to see how little there was fun and enjoyment mentioned within the sport-specific strivings that the fellas had. But then when folded together with that idea and the framework from Amanda Vizek, back in 2015, it really sort of correlated with some of her findings and some of her research that sort of went, okay, well, this actually makes, a lot of sense. We can see that these fellas are, trying to improve, have certain markers and goals for themselves. They're really trying to build this knowledge base from their coaches and whatever, which again folded in nicely and correlated very well with her findings of that fun framework, which I think is fairly well known out there now as well.
I think it's interesting. I think asking 17 to 20-year-olds these questions at that level, at that standard, at the elite level, where most of them may have an eye on striving to be the best that they can be, possibly professional careers, that the terms fun and enjoyment weren't used, but as you're kind of mentioning there, that really perhaps they're loaded onto that achievement focus, trying hard, positive coaching, learning and improving, that actually the fun is the striving to achieve. Is that how you interpreted that, perhaps?
Absolutely. Again, there was the data really, reflected back and showed us, again, there was a lot of talk. Improve was the most common word used right throughout all these strivings, both within and away from their sport. So they're at this age where, late adolescence, young adulthood, there's this real, like I said before, identity versus role confusion. So they're trying to use the sport as a way to show possibly their relevance or just achieve goals themselves as well. Really sort of putting themselves out there, and so as I said, initially for me, and I guess I wanted to find these high performance players enjoying their sport, but there was the lack of language around that, but certainly the lack of strength within the data, which can correlate to some other research out there as well, that they're really trying to push and test themselves in a way that is meaningful for them. And I guess that's hard, and again, presenting this back to coaches, I guess this is the hard part of it. It's for us as coaches to try and develop and integrate this program where, yes, we're creating team themes and goals and culture, but then we need to tap into this individualized goals and the markers that the players have within themselves, to try and give them a sense of fulfillment from being involved in this program, and hopefully then that can turn into this retention and engagement that we're looking for from these high performance programs. So.
It's interesting, Jonny, because a few things I've written down here as you're speaking. I mean, athletic identity. A couple of concerns, I suppose, is if those personal strivings are solely oriented towards achievement focus, and the players, as you've mentioned, are starting to their identity is becoming wrapped up in the effort and the engagement in elite level sports, and everything's oriented towards getting better, achieving, then their identity becomes wrapped up in that. And so subsequently that as a sports psychologist, alarm bells start to ring. The stress and anxiety potentially involved in constantly striving to improve every single day, and potentially finding oneself not improving, because that, at least in my experience, can tend to happen at that age range, and that often makes the difference in terms of who goes on and has a professional career. And again, on the basis that I would imagine most of these players are starting to think that way, a lot of them will experience a lot of stress and anxiety because they'll see other players improving when they don't necessarily improve. And then I think it sounds to me like the big thing for you is that narrow motivational pattern, that there's perhaps a deep sense of extrinsic motivation. I want to improve in my sport, and I want to develop my skills, but it's still quite a narrow motivational pattern. That perhaps there could be an effort from coaches based on this feedback to try to broaden that motivational pattern towards, as you said, fun, enjoyment, cooperation, even cooperation with competitors, perhaps creating a more joyful feeling amongst engagement. No question there, mate, just some thoughts and feelings from that.
No, that's, and again, I think that's fair. As you said, it's trying to, these fellows are stepping into this program, and again, we're trying to develop them as a person as well as a player. You know what I mean? So understanding, why, as you said, trying to better understand, what they're trying to achieve away from the field might offer opportunities within a program to, give them ways to express themselves. Again, if they're doing, a certain qualification or doing a certain role, having ways to possibly apply some of those ideas and fold them into the sports program they're part of might be an interesting way to look at it. But I guess one of the questions I had for yourself, and who's done a lot of personality development research, I was the novel way around this research was, I had a wide access to a big data pool and whatever, but I was unable to do these real follow-up questions or, motivational or a better understanding of the questions afterwards. So I just, I've almost got this conflict within myself. Were these fellas doing, presenting some primary goal strategies? Essentially, were they structuring or trying to change the environment to fit their goal strategies, or was it the other way around? Did the programs respond to them? So they offered a high achievement focus. So, again, it was just hard to understand. Again, Dan McAdams himself says, the self never gives up as an actor. So, are they responding to the environment, or has the environment responded to them? Again, as you said, it's such a critical age. I guess these are some of the questions. Like most good research projects, there's probably left more questions than it's given answers. But yeah, just these are the type of things, like you said, that I'm sort of fighting with and trying to better understand. And I guess I've only found one layer of the onion. It's trying to find a few more after this, as you said. So.
Well, yeah. I think it's fascinating. I mean, I think you've asked young people in an elite environment to contribute towards how they perceive their environment and what they've got to be doing in their environment, what they're striving for. And what you've got back from them is a lot of answers around an achievement striving, an achievement orientation. And, you know, to throw some thoughts back at you, you just wonder how socialized they are into that notion of striving to become elite, that it's all got to be achievement orientation and approach, and it's all about personal achievement and personal growth, and I've got to be better. And, you know, striving again at that level, 17 to 20-year-olds playing rugby union in a highly competitive environment. It's unsurprising that they're saying that. However, you wonder how socialized these young players are into, for instance, gotta perform, gotta get better. And just by saying that, you know, you start to feel a sense of stress and a sense of anxiety. And if there's not more there, if there's not more from an enjoyment perspective, a fun perspective, if there's not a wider definition of motivation, a broader definition, then that to me is concerning. If the goals are narrow, if the goals are solely focused on sport, and they don't have goals in other areas of their life, if their values are solely focused on competitive type values, if their beliefs are this is all or nothing, I have to focus only on this, it's the only way I'm going to be the best that I can be. Again, I come back to goals, values, beliefs, and that's exactly what Dan McAdams, for those listening in, Professor Dan McAdams from Northwestern University, came on the Sports Psych show. He's a personality scientist, arguably one of the world's leading authorities on personality development, so the development of personality across the lifespan. And he talks about what you've talked about there, Jonny, which is motivational agency, characteristic adaptations, how we're speaking to us, what goals we have, what values we engage in, what beliefs we have about our situation, our environment that we find ourselves in. And it strikes me potentially that players at this age are very socialized into these kind of extreme all or nothing viewpoints, which then skew how they experience that environment towards something that is quite anxiety ridden and quite stressful. Now, you know, do they have to engage in a lot of hard work around their sport if they want to get better? Do they have to be quite one-dimensional at times? Very possibly, very probably. But could we broaden out the motivational patterns? Could they have other things in their life? Absolutely, in my opinion. Those would be my thoughts, Jonny. I don't know what you're thinking as I'm speaking there.
No, it's there's a lot of research and it's, within sport it's very rare for coaches to profile athletes beyond these dispositional traits. It's easy. They're used to, and it's quite easy to measure players for these traits. Whether it be an internalized or an ability or a skill or something like that. It's quite easy for them to measure against these traits, which leaves out a lot of this contextual information that you're talking about. How, as you say, how adaptive they can be to the time, the role, the situation, or whatever it might be. So again, it's just the idea for this research was to give a better understanding of what these players are typically trying to do, trying to gain a snapshot of both the overall theme of the group and individual sort of motivational workings within it, but and allow the programs to adjust, or even coaching techniques to adjust based on what these players, how they respond or what they're looking for. But I guess it's just to try and offer that contextual information, that ideas behind it that hopefully the fellas can, or coaches can, act and react to. So, but again, it's hard. As you said, I guess the question that's still outstanding was, did the players respond to, like you're suggesting, did the players respond to what was essentially the feeling was out there was, you got to improve, you've got to perform, you've got to get better. or was that inherently already within them? Did they know stepping into this high performance environment? Was this an internalization of this, this sense of improvement, this sense of achievement focused striving? Was that already there, and the environment offered it to them as a result? It's hard to say. It's hard to gather, as I said.
I would also say, Jonny, and I'd like to get your thoughts and just an opinion on this. Is that is what they want what they need?
Good question.
Because they're going into, if they are reporting back, if their striving is solely achievement focused, which, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's what I heard is everything you said, this approach orientation, this individualized focus on, I want to get better. I want to get better. And we haven't even spoken about the lack of sort of teamship there, which for my experience working with 17 to 20-year-old, let's say, soccer players in elite environments in England, is everything tends to be oriented towards trying to have a professional career or trying to get into the first team. And so, again, they're almost socialized into, it's about me. It's about me being the best that I can be. And so skills around leadership, teamship, and relationship tend to either be ignored, pushed to the side, or something is done but very little is done around those areas. Is what they're wanting actually what they need? Difference between wants and needs. And again, on this basis of, well, Jonny, I just want to come and be the best that I can be, I want to achieve. Well, in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, in 5 years' time, you might be regretting that, because whether that's very one-dimensional, your identity is wrapped up around that, or actually you're going to have a lot of stress and anxiety here, and maybe sort of other maladaptive. You're going to experience other maladaptive emotions here. So, is what they want what they actually need?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And again, that was the idea, to try and offer a better snapshot of what they actually want to versus what they need. Again, it's a hard question to ask. And again, what should we be offering them? As you said, late adolescent, young adult players and whatever. What should the research suggests? They're looking for this sense of identity. They're coming into the a young adult. They're looking for possibly this sense of group belonging, or where they actually fit within, both within a rugby perspective and even within society as well. So just trying to understand where they can fit. So yeah, did the coaches actually, have a better feeling and understand and offer, a sense of what they actually needed versus what they wanted? I guess that's the questions coming from the research, is we didn't get these secondary or follow-up questions to actually see, if there were some adjustments made or certain, new ideas offered. So again, it should be said, so we questioned these fellas twice, both at the high performance section of the season and later in the season when they returned back to club. Or a more social rugby environment. But again, the strivings offered, or the overall theme, stayed pretty much the same. Right through the course of the season. So when they are involved in this, they're stepping into sport. They step into rugby. Whatever it might be, as I say, the high performance section or the social section of the season. And again, they're stepping into an environment where they try to achieve, and they're knocking off the markers that they want to achieve, and then step away for that more, for those deeper connections, those friendships, those other ways. So they step into this environment where they want to prove themselves, and then step away. So I guess coming to your question, maybe what are we giving them, what they want or what they need? I guess the data would suggest, and again, this is one snapshot from one group of players, what they want or what they need from this is to step into a highly challenging environment where they get to test themselves. So again, and that's, who are we as coaches almost to step in the way of that? We create an environment where they're testing themselves, understand the markers they want to try and tick off and achieve, and let them go for it, essentially. But yeah, I agree with exactly what you're saying. There was a very little talk of team and social, that social aspect, that even affiliation within, there were some connections strung together with some of the coaches, but very little of that, that co-player, that friendship group even within the sport, that all seemed to be away from the sport. It seemed to be quite cold, quite mechanical sort of way to step into the sport and have these goals and markers that they wanted to internally process and constantly build on, where as opposed to there was this lack of this social connection within the group, that they were actually playing around and with.
So my understanding from what you're saying from the data is that there were plenty of intrapersonal strivings, but not as many interpersonal strivings, and there were plenty of achievement strivings reported, but fewer affiliation strivings. So
yep, you've nailed it. You've obviously done a bit of reading around this today. But that's exactly it. Yeah, there was a lot of intrapersonal. The affiliation coded strivings could be coded heavily with coaches, more so even other players. Again, one of the sections I talk about within the research paper, they really identified the coach as a resource. So again, that comes back to Vizek's work of this knowledgeable coaching. Still a positive coaching, but this knowledgeable coaching. This is what they find. Essentially, they're a sponge, and even that starts off with the 17-year-old players. There's more affiliated coded strivings to the coach to try and sponge this information than even the slightly older players, the players that are 20 or the third year in the program. Again, they have a more achievement coded, strivings as well. So again, they recognize the information they can gather from the coach, and by the end of this age grade program, they're really trying to hammer home that of what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, you've nailed it. Yeah, a lot of intrapersonal as opposed to interpersonal or intrapersonal, and yeah, as I say, high achievement with some affiliative strivings within sports specific stuff. Yeah.
Was this solely done with a male cohort?
Solely male, yes. 17 to 20-year-old male players, yes. Yep.
So we may see different data. May see different data with females.
And that's the aim. That's hopefully the next research project, is to do it in conjunction with male and female players. Yeah, just to try and see again that transition over time. Especially, I'd like to do a longitudinal study to understand the difference between male and female players, especially over this transition age, as we talked about. From the last 2 years of school and going into the first year outside school, what the changes are in there, because we're hopefully we can try and create these engaging or certainly, to come back to what you said before, offer players what they need from these environments to stay engaged and at the same time hopefully develop on a level that they want to as well as need to. So yeah.
Fascinating. So with thousands of coaches listening in, from doing this first research project around strivings, personal strivings, 17 to 20-year-old elite rugby players, what would be your recommendations?
Look, yeah, Cliff and Stephen have been very good about this, that context is important. You've got to understand, ask meaningful questions for the players that you're coaching right now. Understand, the big thing from this was, for me, like I wanted to understand why these players are involved in their sport. And again, look, we've got common themes right across a big cohort of players. But again, for, like you said, for the coaches out there, you might be coaching anywhere between, say 8 to 15, number of players within your squad. It's asking meaningful questions, having those conversations to understand why they're there, what's important to them, what goals and markers they're trying to achieve. So to try and, to come back to my son's example, offer a meaningful environment or an environment that's applicable for the goals that they're trying to achieve within the sport. And even then understanding what they're trying to achieve away from the sport. Again, it could be from anywhere from 8 to 18 years of age or older. If you understand better what's going on away from the sport and field, then you can understand, you can have those conversations about, say what's going on with home life, how's, the wife, how's the kids and whatever. So, because again, a disengaged player may not be solely down to what's happening, once they cross the paint. It might be what's happening on the drive to training for an example. So yeah, just the big thing for me would be just that context is important, and have those meaningful conversations and ask those sort of deep, meaningful, open-ended questions, and listen. Listen to the responses you get.
What do you want? How do you want to get there? How can I be a part of this journey with you? What can I contribute? A negotiation, essentially, a conversation, a negotiation, and perhaps coaching authoritatively, coaching instructionally where you can or where you think it's appropriate, but also bringing the player into that decision process as well.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Well, you know what? I will be so interested to see where this line of research goes. I think I just think it just demonstrates the complexity, the fascination, and the complexity of coaching that I think the history of coaching has tended to be. I've got all this information in my head. It's about me giving you this information, and that's the end of that. But what I think we now, many of us, accept is that it's a bit more nuanced than that. It's a bit more contextual than that. It's a bit more individual specific than that. That, ultimately, there is such a thing as coaching expertise. Nobody denies that, but it's just how one delivers that expertise, and then how one accommodates context and individual differences within your coaching environment. So I just think it's fascinating, Jonny. That's my last thought summing up from me. Any last thoughts yourself?
No, yeah, it is interesting. As I say, it's just, we understand, especially for the age grade players that I'm talking about, the 17 to the 20-year-old players. Like, yeah, it's just a bit of patience, just a bit of understanding for these stages of personality development they're going through. So the coach can be an extremely influential person in their lives. So to have that bit of patience, and as I say, I'm pretty excited for. Hopefully, I'll extend on some similar research in years to come, because it's a fascinating insight into the personality development. And as you said, Professor McAdams is the more you read, the more interesting it is, and the more sort of folds of interest that I find every time I read deeper into it. So.
Good stuff. Now, I know you would have tapped into the interest of many in the audience. So how can people find you, Jonny? Do you do social media, Twitter, etc.? And also, how can people get in contact should they want to?
Yep, on Twitter, at coachingcoach_. Fairly active on Twitter. I like to share, have a blog, which I try and write on every now and again, probably less regularly recently and whatever, but www.coachingthecoaches.net. And as I say, my email address is there, just johnny@coachingthecoaches.net. So if anyone wants to reach out for more about this research, or even just general chat and coaching, go for your life. Sounds great.
Fantastic. Well, Jonny, thank you so much for your time today, mate.
No worries. Thanks very much for the invite.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook, or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now. Hey, mate. Thank you